So, Excellencies, colleagues, good afternoon. Good to be with you this afternoon. If we can slowly get going, I would appreciate that. So let me say at the outset that we know that there's a consistent need for mine action while funds are dwindling and sometimes hard to obtain. So the question that we're going to look at in this session is indeed if a voluntary trust fund of a certain nature can be part of the answer to that question. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce this agenda item on the possible establishment of a voluntary trust fund under the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention. And I do so on behalf of my country, Norway, as chair of the working group established to explore the feasibility of such a VTF. And just to recall the background, the mandate comes from the Fifth Review Conference in Siem Reap and the action plan that was adopted at that meeting. The working group is chaired by Norway and composed of Algeria, Colombia, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, with Japan, Zambia, and Belgium as observers. And we have been tasked with considering whether a targeted convention-based fund could help affected states that are currently not adequately reached by existing funding arrangements. And what I intend to do is to say a little bit about where we are currently on Article 5 implementation and on the whole funding situation around mine action, and then turn to whether a fund like the one we are discussing can fill a need, be an added value for this niche target group that we want to help with this financing. Maybe in terms of what has already happened in this process, on 6th June, the working group shared an update with you on the feasibility of a VTF. And I'd like to say that the issue before us is practical, but also political and humanitarian. How can we ensure that all affected state parties, including those struggling to secure support, are able to meet Article 5 obligations? And if I'm correctly informed, there are currently 33 state parties that still have outstanding Article 5 obligations, and a majority of them are not fully on track. So while the convention has delivered major progress in the last 3 decades, implementation remains uneven. And some affected state parties receive little or no international mine action funding, even when relatively modest and targeted support could help them to move closer to completion. So that's one of the observations that we have made, that there are quite a few states that are close to the finishing line, but that struggle to get across because of lack of resources. So the issue is not only the overall volume of funding, but also how resources are prioritized and allocated. A possible VTF would not be a general mine action fund, but a mechanism for state parties that struggle to secure support for their legal and time-bound commitments under Article 5. So where are we on global financing of mine action today? You know as well as I do that funding has become more constrained and uneven, and the growing needs are certainly outpacing available resources. And funding remains concentrated among a small group of donors and contexts. Some affected state parties, as a result, receive little or no support for the survey, planning, and program management needed to complete Article 5 obligations. Also, bilateral budgets are under strain, and mine action is not always prioritized within larger development and multilateral financing, despite clear links to stabilization and recovery. We all know that mine action is a long and work-intensive process. Sometimes the argument that this is very closely linked, indeed a precondition for development, is not fully understood. So reduced donor funding has already led to downsizing or suspension of activities in some contexts. So the challenge is therefore not only the volume of funding, but also its predictability, allocation, and reach for those state parties that are currently left behind. So that is why we think a VTF would need to be realistic, limited in scope, and carefully designed, targeted at gaps not adequately covered elsewhere, without duplicating existing channels or creating unnecessary administrative burdens. But there is a need, and the target group for a possible VTF would be the affected state parties that are struggling to secure international assistance for the legal and time-bound Article 5 obligations, in particular those receiving no or very limited support through existing mechanisms, and those with the political commitment, with the political will to do clearance, but lacking the resources. The paper identifies two situations where the need appears particularly acute. Firstly, state parties with limited national capacity and limited access to international funding. And secondly, state parties close to completion but unable to secure the targeted support needed for the final stages, for the last mile. In both cases, relatively modest support could unlock progress that is otherwise not being prioritized. At a later stage, and provided that sufficient contributions are available, the VTF could also consider to support state parties with large and more complex contamination contexts that struggle to achieve completion of Article 5. And again, the added value of a VTF would not be to replace existing bilateral and multilateral channels, nor to create a general mine action fund. Its value would be direct limited resources to state parties that existing funding arrangements do not adequately reach. We believe a lean design would be essential. Rather than creating a parallel structure, a VTF should build on the Convention's existing machinery with limited and clearly defined administrative support from the implementation support unit here by my side, and political guidance from the state parties. This would keep the mechanism efficient, accountable, and closely linked to Article 5 implementation. Let me try and sum up and say something about the way ahead. In a way, unfortunately, the case for a voluntary trust fund is straightforward. Some affected state parties need limited, targeted support to make progress towards completion. A carefully designed VTF could fill this specific gap, translating collective commitment under the Convention into timely and measurable progress. So we would, of course, in the working group welcome at this stage your views from state parties and other stakeholders on the feasibility in general of such a fund, but specifically on these three questions. 1, who should be eligible for support if indeed we establish a VTF like this? What types of support should the VTF provide? And thirdly, how much more detail concerning the structure and administration of the VTF should be developed before the 23rd meeting of state parties, including whether elements of terms of reference would be useful. What we intend to do after having heard your views today is to send a letter to all state parties and request further written response. So you also have a chance to reply in writing with a deadline of 3 August. And then we could consider after that to present elements of terms of reference that will give a clearer picture about how a VTF would work in practice. And that will also ensure that if state parties decide to establish a VTF, its establishment is not delayed. We sort of work on the mechanics while we are discussing the feasibility of the fund. Secondly, what we consider as the working group is to organize informal consultations to further refine elements during mid or late August. So you will have ample opportunity to voice your input and concerns around this fund. We will also host additional informal meetings in the lead-up to the meeting of state parties if needed. The aim is to ensure that we assess all views and are able to submit an informed and inclusive decision to the meeting of the states parties. So that was what I wanted to say by way of introduction, and now I very much welcome the views from you in the audience, dear colleagues, and I see some brave people already signing up. Yes, wonderful. I have a list even. So the first one on my list is the delegation of Belgium. Belgium, please, where are you? You have the floor. Yes. Belgium?
Thank you, Mr.
Yes, there you are. You have the floor, Belgium, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Belgium would like to thank the full members of the working group for their efforts to move the process on the potential establishment of a voluntary trust fund for the APMBC forward. My delegation underlines that such a voluntary trust fund should play a role complementary to that of existing financial channels. Therefore, the mechanism should be well designed and structured, and its aims should align with the magnitude of funding that can realistically be expected. Based on the finding that the number of affected states parties have difficulty reaching their legal and time-bound commitments under Article 5 of the Convention because they struggle to secure international assistance, the states parties decided during the Fifth Review Conference to look into the establishment of such a voluntary trust fund. Recalling this underlying idea for the creation of a VTF, Belgium wants to stress that a potential VTF should primarily be accessible to affected states parties struggling to secure international assistance and with outstanding commitments under Article 5. In our view, priority should be given to situations where support from the VTF would provide a comparative advantage towards reaching the goal of becoming mine-free. In other words, states parties that are likely to reach completion within a fairly short period of time should they receive targeted support from such a VTF. To set this VTF apart from other existing funding mechanisms, Belgium would plead for the VTF to focus on smaller, short-term targeted enabling measures to reach completion, including baseline surveys, technical and non-technical surveys, or information management. These activities may act as a catalyst for broader mine action efforts. As a young fund, a potential VTF will need time to attract sufficient resources at the time. Therefore, broadening the donor base could help enhance sustainability and viability. The VTF should therefore, in our view, be open to contributions from non-states parties, international organizations, and private finance, alongside, of course, states parties. Belgium sees a role for the ISU in the day-to-day management of such a VTF. We are cognizant that there are only a few months left until the MSP, interrupted by a summer break and after the resumption of a busy disarmament calendar. Therefore, my delegation does plead for pragmatism. For my delegation, it is clear that the terms of reference agreed by the MSP are essential for the establishment of VTF. In case states parties cannot endorse specific terms of reference at the 23rd MSP, we are hopeful that the decision can be taken on the principle of the establishment of a VTF, so that potential terms of reference can be further developed afterwards and hopefully be adopted at the 24th MSP. I thank you.
Thank you, Belgium, for comprehensive and important remarks. We have taken due note, and it's very positive that you engage in this way, not least because you're also the next president of the convention. But I take away, that you are, like us, looking at the catalytic functioning of the fund, limited in time and scope, and indeed also, thank you for mentioning the issue of resources. I mean, a fund needs money, and that's something we have to bear in mind in the design of the whole thing. I thank Belgium. I now turn to Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau, please, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La Guinée-Bissau se félicite de la création de ce fonds fiduciaire que permettra aux pays en phase de finalisation de leurs obligations au titre de l'article 5 de la Convention, comme la Guinée-Bissau, de bénéficier d'un soutien accru, alors même qu'ils continuent de rencontrer des difficultés pour accéder au financement international. D'autre part, ce fonds fiduciaire contribuera au renforcement des capacités nationales afin de soutenir les efforts déployés pour le respect des obligations conventionnelles et la gestion des risques résiduels dans les pays concernés. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much to Guinea-Bissau. I now turn to Chile, followed by Thailand. Chile, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Gracias a Noruega también y al grupo del trabajo por todo el liderazgo y el análisis realizado respecto de la viabilidad del establecimiento del fondo fiduciario. Compartimos la evaluación en cuanto a las brechas existentes en el financiamiento, particularmente en algunos estados parte con capacidades nacionales limitadas o con acceso insuficiente a la cooperación internacional. Valoramos especialmente además los obstáculos operacionales que han sido identificados por el grupo, los cuales retrasan el cumplimiento de las obligaciones derivadas del artículo 5, incluyendo limitaciones en materia de levantamientos técnicos, gestión de la información, desarrollo de capacidades institucionales y planificación estratégica. De la misma manera, para Chile es fundamental que se establezca un mecanismo flexible, focalizado y de carácter complementario, de tal manera de generar una sinergia en todos los elementos que participan. Por otra parte también nos parece fundamental que se preserven los principios de transparencia, eficiencia y rendición de cuentas junto al liderazgo de los estados partes y que utilicemos las estructuras ya existentes de la Convención, manteniendo también los costos administrativos reducidos. Sabemos que en el momento complejo que enfrenta el multilateralismo en todas sus áreas, mantener esto será realmente fundamental. Finalmente, valoramos el potencial que esta iniciativa ofrece para ampliar la base de contribuyentes y promover la responsabilidad compartida más amplia en el cumplimiento de los objetivos humanitarios de la Convención. Reiteramos una vez más que Chile seguirá participando constructivamente en todas estas discusiones. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, just to update you on the speakers list, I have now Thailand, Austria, Niger, Peru, France, UK, Turkey, and Mauritania. And then Mine Action Review, UNMAS, NPA, and ICBL, CMS for the time being. But I'll now turn to Thailand to be followed by Austria. Thailand, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Excellency. Thailand commends the working group for its continued work under the mandate provided in Action 44 of Siem Reap Angkor Action Plan. We recognize the mine survey and clearance operations across regions continue to be hampered by financial difficulties and lack of technical advancement, pushing affected states further from the goal of completion. We note important points raised in a comprehensive working paper exploring the feasibility of establishing a fund, including the principle that any such mechanism must not operate in silos or duplicate the work of existing mechanisms, both within and outside the Convention. We consider this paper as a good starting point, which will facilitate the meeting of state parties in taking a decision in accordance with Action 44. In this regard, Thailand believes that the meeting of state parties would benefit from additional information and further deliberation on the following points. First, the operationalization of the fund, including its decision-making process, its interaction with existing mechanisms, and participation of other stakeholders in its works. Greater clarity in this area will help define the respective roles of donors, affected states, and other stakeholders. Second, the clear and transparent eligibility criteria for the support provided by the fund, as well as the identification of prioritized recipients, including states nearing the finishing line. This is essential to avoid ambiguity and ensure confidence in the mechanism. In our view, the criteria should retain sufficient flexibility to respond to state parties facing sudden changes or locating newly laid landmines in their territories. In conclusion, Thailand reaffirms its commitment to supporting all efforts to address the specific bottlenecks that prevent states from declaring themselves mine-free. I thank you.
Thank you, Thailand, and thank you for pointing out, questions around important features of this thing that I think, going forward we need to clarify. It will be important for all of you to make a final decision on where you stand on the VTF. So thank you, Thailand. We now turn to Austria, followed by Niger. Austria.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We would like to thank the working group chaired by Norway for their dedicated work put into exploring the feasibility of establishing a voluntary trust fund in the convention over the past months. Having listened to debates on Article 5 implementation and the need for continued extension requests over the past several years, we have read with great interest the paper submitted by the working group to this session, particularly the assessment that securing resources for last-mile completion of Article 5 obligations is currently not a priority for any funding mechanism was quite striking. We support the overall assessment contained in the paper, but would like to see the important humanitarian imperative underlying clearance activities strengthened also in the proposal. Clearance is not an end in itself. It is a means to end the suffering caused by anti-personnel mines. And even small contamination, which is left in the ground for years, seemingly forgotten by donors, bears life-threatening risks for local populations. According to the Landmine Monitor 2025, 36 states parties reported new mine and explosive ordnance casualties in 2024, and of the 25 states parties that reported on victim assistance in Article 7 reports, we noted that only 7 reported no new casualties. It would therefore be essential that the VTF selection criteria take into consideration states parties with a high number of casualties, where relatively limited and well-targeted support could have a disproportionate impact on lives saved. Mr. Chair, with regard to the advantages of embedding a voluntary trust fund in the machinery of the Convention, we do see a merit in leveraging existing structures within the Convention and avoiding duplication and additional burden. The suggested regular reporting by recipients should therefore be integrated into existing reporting obligations to avoid additional reporting requirements by states parties. It should also be assessed to what extent the administrative support to be provided by the ISU, including screening of applications, reporting, and transparency arrangements, would put additional work on the already limited capacity of the ISU. Drawing from examples of other mechanisms with voluntary trust funds and the amount of work and resources required from secretariat entities would be a useful benchmark in this regard. The structure of the selection committee, based on the expected support that it should provide, is not fully clear yet from our point of view. It is proposed that the VTF provide support to targeted measures such as planning, technical expertise, survey-related activities, and other catalytic interventions. Such a support requires expertise that might not be able to be solely provided by states parties. We therefore urge that the selection committee is composed of a multi-stakeholder group of states parties, civil society, operators, and other relevant actors. Although while the operationability of the selection committee needs to be ensured, which might not allow for a large multi-stakeholder group, it could also be considered that the selection committee be supported by an advisory group. Such a group could give preliminary assessments on proposals to allow for better informed decision-making on which proposals could have the greatest impact on the ground. Mr. Chair, we would like to again thank the working group for presenting their proposal on the VTF today and ensure you of our support for the work ahead. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Austria, for those useful inputs. We now turn to Niger, to be followed by Peru. Niger, please, you have the floor, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Excellences, chers collègues. Le Niger salue l'initiative visant à la création d'un fonds fiduciaire volontaire destiné à soutenir les États parties confrontés à des difficultés persistantes dans la mise en œuvre de leurs obligations au titre de l'article 5 de la Convention. Cette initiative arrive à un moment particulièrement important car elle répond à une réalité que nous observons depuis plusieurs années, celle d'États parties engagés de bonne foi dans l'exécution de leurs obligations, mais limitées par l'insuffisance de moyens techniques, financiers et logistiques, malgré des besoins urgents et clairement identifiés. Monsieur le Président, le Niger souhaite, à cet égard, partager son expérience concrète. Depuis la découverte des mines antipersonnelles de type AP ID51 dans la zone de Madama, au nord du pays, dans la région d'Agadez, le Niger s'est pleinement engagé dans la mise en œuvre de ses obligations au titre de l'article 5 de la Convention. Cette découverte intervenue dans un contexte sécuritaire déjà fragile a révélé une contamination complexe, aggravée par la présence de mines anti-chars et d'engins explosifs improvisés dans d'autres régions du pays. Malgré cet engagement, le Niger a dû solliciter à ce jour au moins 3 prolongations successives de délais, en raison notamment de l'ampleur réelle de la contamination, initialement sous-estimée, et des contraintes opérationnelles sur le terrain. Nous tenons à souligner un élément essentiel depuis la première découverte des zones contaminées et durant l'ensemble de ces périodes de prolongation, le Niger n'a bénéficié d'aucun appui international significatif dédié au déminage du site de Madama. En dépit de la gravité de la situation et des risques humanitaires persistants pour les populations et les forces déployées, aujourd'hui, encore plus de 177 000 mètres carrés restent à dépolluer dans une zone difficile d'accès, soumise à des conditions climatiques extrêmes et à des contraintes sécuritaires majeures. Monsieur le Président, c'est précisément dans ce type de contexte que la création d'un fonds fiduciaire volontaire prend tout son sens. Le Niger considère que le VTF devrait répondre à 3 impératifs fondamentaux. Premièrement, l'équité, en garantissant qu'aucun État partie ne soit laissé seul face à des obligations lourdes lorsque les moyens nationaux sont insuffisants. Deuxièmement, l'efficacité en ciblant prioritairement les États proches de l'achèvement de leurs obligations, mais bloqués par un déficit de financement. Troisièmement, la solidarité internationale qui constitue l'un des principes fondateurs de notre Convention. Dans le cas du Niger, un appui ciblé et prévisible permettrait d'achever les opérations de dépollution dans un délai raisonnable, estimé à 5 ans conformément à la nouvelle demande de prolongation qui court jusqu'en 2029. Monsieur le Président, le Niger a déjà consenti des efforts significatifs sur ses propres ressources, notamment dans le cadre de la formation des démineurs, la mise en place des normes alignées sur les NILAM, le déploiement d'équipes spécialisées et l'engagement de moyens budgétaires internes. Toutefois, ces efforts demeurent insuffisants face à l'ampleur du défi. Je précise que nous avons fait jusqu'à 36 000 mètres carrés et c'est de là que restent les 177 000. C'est pourquoi le Niger lance un appel clair et responsable à la communauté internationale pour la mise en œuvre, la mise en opération effective du fonds fiduciaire qui doit aller au-delà d'une intention politique et devenir un mécanisme concret, accessible, rapide et adapté aux réalités du terrain. Monsieur le Président, enfin, le Niger demeure pleinement engagé à respecter ses obligations internationales, mais cet engagement ne peut produire tous ses effets sans un partenariat renforcé, structuré et prévisible. En soutenant le VTF, nous ne créons pas seulement un instrument financier, nous consolidons la crédibilité de notre convention et nous garantissons que l'objectif humanitaire ultime, un monde sans mines antipersonnelles, reste réalisable pour tous, sans exception. Je vous remercie.
Thank you for your statement, sir, including for reminding us about the realities that can typically lead to Article 5, the need for Article 5 extensions and indeed the need for additional financing. We will now turn to Peru, followed by France. Peru, please, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente, distinguidos delegados. El Perú desea agradecer a Noruega en su calidad de presidente del comité por la informativa presentación y por la conducción transparente e inclusiva de las consultas sobre la posible creación de un fondo fiduciario voluntario en el marco de esta convención. Valoramos el esfuerzo por escuchar a todas las delegaciones y por presentar opciones realistas que respondan a las necesidades de los estados afectados. Deseo recordar que el Plan de Acción de Siem Reap Angkor 2025-2029, en su acción 44, hace un llamado explícito a movilizar y asegurar asistencia internacional adecuada, predecible y sostenible para los estados afectados por las minas antipersonal. En ese sentido, mi delegación considera que un fondo fiduciario voluntario podría constituir una herramienta útil para complementar y no reemplazar los mecanismos existentes. Su valor añadido radicaría en facilitar contribuciones de nuevos donantes, incluidos actores no tradicionales, aumentar la previsibilidad del financiamiento para los estados afectados y próximos a cumplir con sus obligaciones, reducir la fragmentación de los flujos de asistencia y permitir respuestas más rápidas y coordinadas ante necesidades urgentes. Hemos escuchado con atención las preocupaciones expresadas por algunos estados parte respecto a la proliferación de fondos y a los costos administrativos. Sin embargo, consideramos que estas preocupaciones pueden abordarse mediante un diseño adecuado, un fondo ligero, transparente, con gobernanza clara y plenamente alineado con las prioridades definidas por los estados parte y por los estados afectados en particular. Además, la experiencia en otros tratados humanitarios demuestra que los fondos voluntarios bien gestionados no duplican esfuerzos, sino que fortalecen la eficacia colectiva. De cara a la 23ª reunión de los estados partes, será importante que podamos tomar una decisión informada y orientada a la acción. Las víctimas, las comunidades afectadas y los equipos de desminado no pueden esperar indefinitivamente. La credibilidad de nuestra convención depende de nuestra capacidad de asegurar los medios necesarios para cumplir sus obligaciones. Quiero ahora intentar, señor presidente, responder a sus preguntas. Respecto a la elegibilidad de los estados, creo que estamos muy cerca de encontrar un consenso sobre el particular. Creo que de lo que he escuchado prácticamente todos estamos de acuerdo. Y quiero destacar en ese caso que considero que mi país, el Perú, reúne todas las condiciones para ser elegible. Hemos escuchado recientemente el informe de Mine Action Review, en el que se indica que entre los 33 estados partes que están por cumplir sus obligaciones bajo el artículo 5, el único que se encuentra encaminado para cumplirlo, es decir, utilizo la palabra en inglés para que no haya duda, el único que está on track es el Perú. Esto quiere decir que con los esfuerzos comunes de todos nosotros, Perú podría ser el próximo país libre de minas antipersonal. Segundo lugar, respecto al tipo de apoyo que debiera prestarse, esto debe verse caso por caso. Es decir, no todos los casos son iguales. Y recurriendo al principio de transparencia que mencionara el colega de Chile, esto tiene que verse de manera siempre y a lo largo de todo el proceso de manera tripartita. Es decir, el país donante, el administrador del fondo y el país afectado. Podría en algunos casos ser cuatripartita si es que hay un facilitador en el medio, pero a lo largo de todo el proceso. Esto, por mi experiencia en este sector, no siempre es así. En otros fondos voluntarios hay mucha transparencia con respecto al donante, pero no necesariamente la misma transparencia con respecto al país beneficiario respecto al uso de los fondos. Eso tiene que cambiar. Y esto me lleva al tercer punto sobre la arquitectura de este fondo. Cuando decimos Voluntary Trust Fund, usamos la palabra trust, que significa confianza. En castellano decimos fondo fiduciario, que viene de fe, que también significa confianza. Nuestro país tiene plena confianza y apoya y respalda el trabajo del ISU. de la unidad de apoyo a la implementación. Creo que hace un excelente trabajo, pero atendiendo a lo que ya dijera la delegación de Austria, necesitamos apoyar al ISU con mayores recursos para que pueda hacer ese trabajo de la manera más efectiva. Esto además contribuirá a reducir los costos administrativos. Bueno, finalmente, señor presidente, creo que he hablado mucho, pero quiero decir que el Perú reafirma su disposición a seguir participando constructivamente en las consultas que usted va a estar presidiendo y a trabajar también con todas las delegaciones para alcanzar un resultado equilibrado, pragmático y que responda al espíritu humanitario que inspira esta convención. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Peru, and let me commend you and all the speakers for being very concrete and providing very valuable input. I see my good colleague here is taking notes all the time. That is exactly because you are giving us good advice. The next on my list is France, to be followed by the UK. But I encourage everyone to be, economic with the time, because we have still a long list to go. France and then UK. France, you have the floor, please. Sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je tiens tout d'abord à remercier le comité du travail qu'il a fait et mon pays se rallie au résumé que vous avez fait, aux orientations générales que vous avez présentées sur l'utilisation de ce fonds. Cela étant, je voudrais faire un certain nombre de remarques. La première, c'est que nous avons perdu du temps. Ce n'est pas la faute de votre comité, mais cela fait des années, pour ceux qui m'entendent ici, que je plaide pour qu'on s'intéresse aux pays qui sont oubliés, le Tchad, le Sénégal, le Niger, et que je fais remarquer depuis longtemps que vouloir un monde libre de mines est un objectif très louable, mais qui ne sera pas atteint si on oublie une quinzaine de pays qui ne reçoivent jamais aucune aide et que nous concentrons tous les moyens sur quelques pays qui sont au cœur de l'actualité. Et donc il y avait une urgence, et notamment la Convention a besoin de bonnes nouvelles. Nous en avons eu cette année avec la Croatie et le Liban, mais nous avons besoin aussi de pays qui achèvent leur déminage, et lorsque nous l'avons décidé à la dernière conférence d'examen, c'était avec l'espoir de trouver un mécanisme pour accélérer les choses d'ici la prochaine conférence d'examen. Si nous passons 2 à 3 ans à constituer le fonds et ensuite à le doter de moyens financiers, il restera peu de temps avant la prochaine conférence d'examen pour avoir des résultats, et c'est pour ça que je plaide pour, en quelque sorte, un raccourci et des solutions qui nous permettent de mettre les choses tout de suite en place. Quand je parle de raccourci, je veux dire aussi que, comme disent les Anglais, better done than perfectly done. Et donc je m'inquiète un peu lorsque l'on fixe trop de critères, parce qu'au fond, nous savons tous comment utiliser les moyens. Je pense que si on met autour de la table des experts aussi compétents, nous le reconnaissons tous, que ceux de Landmine Monitor ou de Mine Action Review, ils savent parfaitement où est-ce qu'on peut utiliser l'argent tout de suite. Je prends l'exemple, par exemple, de projets qui fonctionnaient très bien, avec des résultats remarquables, dans des pays qui tout d'un coup se sont vus privés de leurs moyens par le retrait, par exemple, d'un grand bailleur. Nous savons très bien que si le lendemain nous rajoutons à ce projet les moyens qui ont disparu, immédiatement les populations bénéficieront de résultats immédiats. Donc je pense que nous pouvons nous fixer assez facilement et sans trop de critères, grâce au bon sens de tous les connaisseurs du domaine du déminage, on peut choisir très très bien les projets à financer, et que là n'est pas la difficulté. Non, la difficulté que je vois, et je voudrais insister partout là-dessus, c'est la difficulté de la constitution du fonds. Précisément parce que moi je plaide depuis longtemps pour qu'on s'intéresse aux pays oubliés, je plaide même dans mon pays pour arriver à financer des pays en cohérence avec mes propos, le Sri Lanka, le Zimbabwe, qu'actuellement nous ne finançons pas, et je n'y arrive pas. Je parlais tout à l'heure de nos amis britanniques, d'ailleurs, qui ont un grand mérite dans cette proposition, grâce à la réunion qu'ils avaient organisée à Wilton Park. Nous sommes 2 pays amis, nous n'avons pas toujours été, d'ailleurs je dis ça à la veille de l'anniversaire de la bataille de Waterloo, mais nous sommes 2 pays amis, mais nous n'avons pas les mêmes amis. Un jour, je discutais avec mon collègue britannique, et il me disait la liste des 11 pays que le Royaume-Uni finance. Et je lui donnais la liste des 11 pays que la France finançait. Nous n'en avions qu'un seul en commun. Ce qui montre bien qu'il est difficile aussi bien de faire des coalitions d'États, parce que nous avons des pesanteurs, nos relations bilatérales, nos habitudes, et aussi nos instruments. Moi, par exemple, en France, mon financement du déminage passe en grande partie par le centre de crise qui fonctionne sur projet. Je ne sais pas encore, bien que je milite pour ce fonds, comment je vais faire pour faire verser au centre de crise un fonds non affecté. Et je crains que ce soit la situation de beaucoup d'États. C'est pour cela que, pour moi, il y a une solution très rapide, si on veut mettre en place ce fonds, et très simple. La seule institution, finalement, qui n'a pas les pesanteurs géographiques qu'ont chacun des grands États européens. Je ne parle que de l'Europe, là. Mais les donateurs européens sont de grands donateurs, c'est l'Union européenne, puisqu'elle a les préférences de plusieurs de ces États. Et je pense que sur le modèle de la convention entre l'Union européenne et l'ISU, ou sur le modèle de la convention entre l'Union européenne et l'UNIDIR qui va bénéficier à 5 pays africains, avec un système juridique d'une simplicité extrême, si nous tous, pays européens, nous mettions d'accord à Bruxelles pour que l'Union européenne soit l'amorceur, l'initiateur de la première dotation à ce fonds, même dans un système aussi souple que celui de la convention entre l'Union européenne et l'ISU, nous pourrions d'ores et déjà commencer à doter le fonds qui verrait d'autres bénéficiaires s'y rajouter de 10 ou 15 millions pour commencer, et cela permettrait d'amorcer le système avant même éventuellement la 23e MSP. C'est une proposition que je mets sur la table parce qu'elle me paraît la plus pratique de mon expérience de bailleur pour avoir un résultat rapide. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, France. I commend your sense of urgency, your impatience indeed, and welcome the signals you gave around funding. We were also relieved to hear that, France and the United Kingdom are now on good terms, and I hope the next speaker can confirm that. The United Kingdom, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can confirm that France and the UK are the best of friends. Firstly, we would like to express our thanks to the working group for their continued work under Norway's leadership to explore the feasibility of the proposal. The UK recognises that despite a record amount of funding for mine action over recent years, the overall global funding picture is not quite so positive. We also recognise that funding for mine action is dispersed. The way, funding for mine action is dispersed can leave some states with less support than others, including those close to fulfilling their obligations under Article 5. There are no easy solutions. We should continue to consider the benefits of multiple approaches in this space and, where possible, how they might complement one another. For example, work on innovative financing, which the UK continues to support. In addition, we encourage further reflection on how existing voluntary funding mechanisms are being utilised, such as the United Nations Voluntary Trust Fund for Assistance in Mine Action, which may not yet be used to their full potential. Better leveraging these existing mechanisms should also be a priority. There are also existing bilateral operations in place, but we understand that a VTF might provide a useful opportunity for some states parties to contribute to a mine clearance fund where they are not running any bilateral funding. In addition, we would welcome further clarity on the proposed governance of the VTF to enable states parties to make an informed decision. In particular, clarification would be helpful on how accountability would be ensured, which projects and activities would be in scope, and how they would be prioritised and assessed, how funds would be allocated, how the mechanism would balance the needs and priorities of both donor and recipient states, and how value for money would be safeguarded. Finally, it is important to note that the ISU already operates with limited resources. Therefore, any staffing resource should be separate from the ISU and paid for exclusively out of funds from the VTF. It is important to ensure that any additional responsibilities would be sustainable, appropriately resourced, and would not detract from its core functions. Any proposal, therefore, should be fully costed to ensure that all relevant costs and implications are clearly understood. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United Kingdom. I look at my speakers list, and I would like to propose that we do a common endeavor to try and get this important meeting finished by 6 o'clock. I think you all deserve to go home by then. And we have then Turkey, Mauritania, Mexico, Brazil, Ireland, Colombia, Germany, Mine Action Review, UNMAS, NPA, ICBL. So that makes 11. So if I can encourage you all to stick to less than 3 minutes, we can all finish in time. With that, I pass the floor now to Turkey, to be followed by Mauritania. Turkey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the outset, we would like to also join in thanking the previous speakers in thanking the working group chaired by Norway and the Implementation Support Unit for the preparation of the document entitled Exploring the Feasibility Study, and express our appreciation for the constructive spirit in the study. Consistent with the foundational spirit of the Ottawa Convention, as enshrined in very first paragraph of its preamble, our ultimate shared goal is to put an end to the suffering caused by anti-personal mines, which tragically claim the lives of or permanently disable hundreds of innocent people every single week. This profound humanitarian imperative must be our guiding light in establishing any mechanisms under the Convention. We believe that the establishment of a voluntary trust fund to support state parties in fulfilling their legal and time-bound commitments under Article 5 would undoubtedly contribute to the Convention's fundamental humanitarian objective. In this framework, since financial shortcomings are among the primary obstacles to mine clearance, Turkey strongly believes that VTF could play a vital role in enabling state parties to meet their mine clearance obligations. We therefore value very much and support the establishment of a mechanism to provide financial and technical assistance in a fair, equitable, and inclusive manner. At this point, we would like to reiterate our previous considerations, which were raised at the 22nd meeting of the state parties. As these have not yet been fully reflected into the working group's feasibility study, we kindly invite the working group to take them into consideration moving forward. On scope and eligibility, Turkey has reservations regarding the eligibility criteria as currently framed, particularly the restriction of beneficiaries to state parties expected to reach completion within a relatively short time frame. This temporal restriction may not be consistent with the principle of leaving no one behind. Moreover, it does not align with the broader scope envisaged under Action 44 of the Siem Reap Anchor Action Plan. It could effectively exclude heavily contaminated state parties that, despite sustained efforts, may require more time to fulfill their obligations. We would therefore welcome a review of the eligibility criteria to ensure the fund remains accessible to all affected state parties struggling to secure international assistance. The criteria for accessing the VTF should go beyond the remaining time to completion and also take into account the scale of contamination, humanitarian risk, operational challenges, gravity of security threats, and transboundary risks. In accordance with the fundamental principle of sovereign equality, all state parties should have the right to fair and equal access to international support mechanisms, regardless of their level of institutional capacity. Turkey supports a management structure based on transparency, accountability, inclusivity, and equitable geographical representation. We propose that the final decision-making body should continue to reside with the state parties during the member meeting of state parties. Fund allocation plans should be developed in an open and transparent manner, submitted for state parties' approval, and should clearly specify allocation periods, selection criteria, and monitoring mechanisms. Furthermore, we would also like to underline the need to address the existing funding gap requires continued attention. According to the Landmine Monitor 2025 report, Turkey is the fourth largest national contributor to the mine action among state parties, yet ranks only 34th among recipients of the international assistance. To place this in perspective, despite being among the 7 most mine-affected countries in the world, Turkey receives 360 times less funding than the top 3 recipient countries. Between 2019 and 2024, 75% of all international mine action assistance was concentrated among just 7 countries. These figures illustrate the depth of the existing imbalance and highlight the critical importance of designing the VTF as a mechanism that genuinely directs resources to the most affected state parties rather than perpetuating existing funding disparities. In conclusion, Turkey supports the establishment of the VTF as a need-based, inclusive and sustainable mechanism that reinforces solidarity amongst state parties and upholds the principle of sovereign equality. The VTF must be designed to bridge the significant funding gaps that persist, ensure equitable access for all affected state parties, and remain firmly grounded in the Convention's humanitarian purpose. We look forward to engaging constructively with the working group in the months ahead and to contributing to the finalization of the funds framework before the 23rd meeting of state parties. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Turkey. Well noted, including your point on eligibility. I remind delegations of my call to limit interventions to 3 minutes. I give the floor now to Mauritania, followed by Mexico. Mauritania, please, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Tout d'abord, je voudrais mentionner le caractère d'urgence. Et d'ailleurs, c'est ce qui me motive à prendre la suggestion de Son Excellence Monsieur Yves Marek. Effectivement, on ne doit pas rester à tergiverser sur le mécanisme d'exécution de ce fonds. Je sais que la création d'un fonds fiduciaire dédié constituerait l'un des mécanismes les plus efficaces pour soutenir les États parties dont les ressources nationales demeurent limitées. En mutualisant les contributions des donateurs et l'expertise des partenaires des pays touchés, concernés. Ce fonds permettrait d'accélérer significativement la mise en œuvre des obligations de l'article 5. Là où certains États auraient autrement besoin de plusieurs décennies pour atteindre les mêmes objectifs. Je prends le cas de mon pays, la Mauritanie. Je sais qu'avec le soutien de la communauté internationale, la Mauritanie pourrait atteindre ses objectifs au bout de 4 ans, je dirais 5 ans. Sans la contribution de la communauté internationale, l'atteinte d'arriver à ces objectifs pourrait prendre quelques décennies. À cet effet, et vu le caractère d'urgence aujourd'hui, je suis complètement d'avis, pas pour question d'amitié ni de fraternité, sinon par le caractère d'urgence, j'opte pour l'option de Son Excellence M. Yves Marek de la France. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mauritania, also for keeping your statement brief. Merci bien. I now turn to Mexico, followed by Brazil. Mexico, please.
Gracias, señor presidente. Tomo la palabra en nombre de Brasil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Panamá, Perú y mi propio país, México. De conformidad con la acción 44 del Plan de Acción de Siembra, los Estados parte deben considerar la viabilidad de crear un fondo fiduciario voluntario para apoyar a los Estados parte afectados que enfrentan dificultades para obtener ayuda internacional, ello con el fin de facilitar el cumplimiento de sus obligaciones legales en virtud del artículo 5 de la Convención. Señalamos que la Convención requiere de un compromiso sostenido por la responsabilidad colectiva de la comunidad internacional. En este sentido, el principio fundamental que debe guiar nuestros esfuerzos es la convicción de que la implementación del artículo 5 no depende exclusivamente de la capacidad económica de cada nación, sino de nuestra voluntad y determinación colectiva por lograr un mundo libre de minas. Actualmente, 33 Estados partes se esfuerzan por cumplir sus obligaciones de limpieza y encuesta. Aunque estos estados difieren en sus contextos y capacidades, comparten el desafío común de limitaciones significativas de recursos que dificultan el cumplimiento de sus obligaciones. Esta situación refleja una brecha estructural en el actual panorama financiero internacional, el cual se debe abordar desde el espíritu de cumplimiento cooperativo. Destacamos que el informe del grupo de trabajo concluye que ninguna herramienta actual responde adecuadamente a las necesidades específicas de todos estos estados. La ausencia de un mecanismo dedicado corre el riesgo de perpetuar la dependencia de las prórrogas de plazos. En ese sentido, reiteramos nuestro apoyo al establecimiento de un fondo fiduciario voluntario diseñado bajo principios de complementariedad, eficiencia y transparencia. La creación de este fondo representaría más que una solución financiera, sería una reafirmación de nuestro compromiso conjunto con la solidaridad internacional y la universalidad de la Convención. Su establecimiento enviará un mensaje potente a la comunidad global de que estamos dispuestos a innovar y adaptarnos a las realidades globales con el fin de enfrentar de manera colectiva los desafíos humanitarios. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mexico. I now turn to Brazil, to be followed by Ireland. Brazil, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. My delegation associates itself to the joint statement delivered just now by Mexico and would like to offer the following additional remarks in its national capacity. Brazil welcomes the report and the rigor with which the working group has approached its mandate under Action 44 of the Siem Reap Action Plan. The report notes that the gap facing many affected states parties is not simply a matter of overall funding volume, but of how existing resources are allocated and prioritized. The pronounced imbalances in the distribution of international mine action assistance, both on the side of donors and on the side of recipients, leaves a large swathe of mine action needs of affected states parties unattended, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Brazil therefore supports the continued exploration of a voluntary trust fund as a targeted complementary instrument within the Convention's own framework. We would also welcome the three guiding principles proposed by the group for a possible VTF, namely that it should focus on the provision of support that is not available through existing channels, that it should remain lean and efficient, and that it be state party led. On the questions on which the working group has invited views, Brazil offers the following preliminary thoughts while remaining open to further discussion. On areas of support, my delegation sees particular value in prioritizing survey, planning, and information management activities given their demonstrated catalytic effect without necessarily excluding limited clearance-related support where this is a decisive missing piece for completion. On the level of detail required ahead of the 23rd meeting of states parties, Brazil would encourage the working group to begin developing elements of possible terms of reference for a VTF. Doing so now would allow states parties to take an informed decision at the 23rd meeting of states parties and would help avoid delays in the operationalization of the fund, should that decision be positive. In closing, Brazil believes that the VTF of this kind has the potential to reinforce not only the operational progress of individual states parties, but the credibility of the Convention's implementation framework as a whole. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Brazil, for an excellent statement. Within 2 minutes, I commend your brevity. We now turn to Ireland, to be followed by Colombia. Ireland, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the comprehensive overview of the efforts taken by the working group on this matter. In the interest of time, I will be brief. Ireland reaffirms its commitment to working with others towards the fulfillment of Article 5 obligations and welcomes the work done by the working group for the consideration of the establishment of a voluntary trust fund. Ireland recognizes the range of considerations involved, which need to be carefully assessed, and remains fully committed to engaging constructively with the working group and other state parties. We note your request to provide input to the guiding questions by the deadline set. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent, Ireland. Thank you very much. We now turn to Colombia, to be followed by Germany. Colombia, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Nos unimos a la declaración conjunta que dio México y en nuestro carácter de miembros del grupo de trabajo que usted preside, quisiéramos dar unos aportes en nuestra capacidad nacional. CIANRIP dio un mandato claro para el grupo de trabajo y bajo este mandato hemos enmarcado nuestro trabajo en la búsqueda de dotar a la Convención de una herramienta absolutamente necesaria para lograr su objetivo en materia de desminado humanitario. El trabajo del grupo y nuestra interacción con la Unidad de Apoyo a la Implementación y con la sociedad civil ha reafirmado lo que consensuamos en CIANRIP. La gran mayoría de los 33 estados que aún no han terminado de cumplir con sus obligaciones en el marco del artículo 5 presentan serias limitaciones para acceder a los recursos financieros necesarios para realizar sus tareas de desminado. Esta grave situación se acentúa más si se tiene en cuenta que de esos estados, la gran mayoría no recibe ningún tipo de ayuda financiera de los sistemas bilaterales o multilaterales actualmente existentes. La laguna es evidente. La Convención necesita fortalecer su arquitectura institucional con la creación de este fondo voluntario. Si nuestro propósito es lograr la universalización y la completa descontaminación de territorios con minas antipersonal, debemos poder proveer herramientas necesarias a estos estados en respuesta a nuestro compromiso con la Convención y la responsabilidad y solidaridad colectiva. Colombia, como uno de los países que ha experimentado con mayor intensidad el desafío de tener en su territorio minas antipersonal, sigue firmemente convencida de la Convención y del mandato del grupo de trabajo. En la actualidad, todavía un 20% del territorio de nuestro país presenta contaminación por minas. Esta es una cifra impactante. A pesar de nuestro rechazo al uso de estos dispositivos y de nuestro compromiso inquebrantable con la Convención, circunstancias particulares de nuestro contexto, como la presencia de un conflicto interno y una geografía extensa y poco accesible, han impedido que podamos declarar nuestro país como un territorio libre de minas. Por ello, en nuestra capacidad nacional, manifestamos que este fondo debe tener en cuenta y estar abierto a que todos los 33 países aún afectados por las minas antipersonal puedan acceder a él. Ello no obsta para que tengamos mecanismos de priorización para enfocar nuestros esfuerzos en aquellos países que no han recibido fondos. Finalmente, hacemos un llamado a todos los estados parte a que puedan apoyar esta iniciativa con sus comentarios y aportes, buscando lograr su adopción en la próxima reunión de estados parte, y una vez establecido, poder otorgar los recursos que requiere el fondo para su apropiado y efectivo funcionamiento. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Colombia, for the account of the situation in your country and for the work that you do in the group. We now turn to Germany, to be followed by Yemen. Germany, Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, I also would like to join others in thanking Norway for leading this important work together with all the other members of the working group. The paper you have put before us is very helpful, and I think it provides a valuable basis for the discussion, for the decisions which lie ahead of us. I can be brief. I think I agree with very much of the points which have been already made by other delegations. I think as far as the starting point is concerned, there is no doubt that securing sufficient support for the implementation of Article 5 obligations is of utmost importance. And we have been discussing this already under the agenda item of cooperation and assistance. And just to recall, in the case of Germany, we are contributing to this to the same in the framework of our mine strategy, and which this mine strategy has identified indeed certain target countries, and in certain way this is the framing of our financial support we can deliver. Listening to the statement just made by my French colleague, I was just thinking perhaps a first exercise of a trust fund could be a sort of mapping exercise and comparing these different priority lists. And I understand that they are different between France and the UK. They might be different also with regard to Germany, to identify really where are the states parties who completely fall out of any support. In this sense, I think a trust fund could then really be a complementary instrument to those existing engagements. So perhaps just 3 points from my side. They all have been mentioned already. First, I think in our view it is certainly essential that the fund looks also for broadening the donor base, especially in times of scarce resources. Second, there's been said already also by Brazil, I think projects should really concentrate on measures which prepare states parties for the last mile. So thinking on things like a baseline survey or improvement of technical survey capacity, and strengthening mine action standards and national capacities. I think we all know that clearance activities are very, very expensive, and I'm afraid that they might overburden such a fund. Just to share with you the experiences we are just making in the volunteer trust fund of the ATT, where we have just discussed measures to guarantee sustainability of the fund, because also there is an imbalance of needs and fundings coming in. And in this respect also, perhaps another comparison, I think it will be very, very important that the projects presented to the fund will be presented by states parties. This is very, very important, also to make sure that there is a clear national ownership for these projects, which might be funded by such a trust fund. Last but not least, but this is a very important point, it is clear, it has been said already, a fund needs to be administered. Again, in comparison with the voluntary trust fund of the ATT, we have here one full-time officer taking care of this fund, not only in implementing decisions of the selection committee, but also in promoting the fund and reaching out in order to get new donors on board. So this is really work, and I think this is something which has to be taken into account, especially if we think that the ISU is already operating on the basis of voluntary contributions. And I think it has been said by another delegation already, I think it has to be clear that these two different bodies have to be clearly separated, because otherwise I think the very, very important work of the ISU might come under even more pressure. So to conclude, I think I agree the perfect is certainly the enemy of the good, but I think there are certain points which we should really address clearly before taking a decision on the voluntary trust fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Germany. We now turn to Yemen, and then we have Zambia so far as the last nation state speaking. Yemen, please.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. سيد الرئيس، بلدي هو أحد البلدان الذي يسعى بكل جهد إلى إيفاء التزاماته، وبالأخص المسائل المتعلقة بالتنفيذ تجاه المادة الخامسة. لدينا صعوبات وتحديات حتى أن بعضها خارج عن إرادتنا في اليمن، وقد أشرنا إلى هذا عدة مرات. إن هذا الصندوق الطوعي هو من ضمن التطلعات التي سوف تساعد الدول المتضررة إلى تغطية الفجوات والعجز الحاصل لا سيما في مسألة حشد الموارد. إن هذه المبادرة هي حسنة، وكما تعرفون إن بلادي هو أحد الدول الأكثر تضررا، ونحن نبدي مرونة وأكثر انفتاحا لنقاشات بناءة يمكن من خلالها الاستفادة من أفق هذه المبادرة مستقبلا، وهذا من أجل مضمون تضافر الجهود، وهذا للوصول إلى الهدف المنشود لتحقيق الخطوات الملموسة كما ذكرتم سيد الرئيس، ولا سيما عن القيمة المضافة لهذا الصندوق الطوعي. نود أن ننوه سيد الرئيس وكما ذكرت مندوبة النمسا ونضم صوتنا معها عن اختلاف احتياجات التمويل نظرا لتنوع الخبرات في هذا الشأن، وهذا يدل على أن سياق البلدان المتضررة يختلف من بلد إلى آخر، وهذا يجب أن يكون ضمن اعتبارات هذه المبادرة، وبالأخص المسائل التي تتعلق بتعزيز الإدارات الوطنية والحوكمة في البلدان المتضررة، وهذا بالتناسب مع مرونة الفترات المناسبة حسب خصوصية البلدان المتضررة واحتياجاتها. سيد الرئيس، لا أريد الإطالة، ولكن نؤكد على التزامات بلادي تجاه الاتفاقية، ولا سيما في المسائل المعنية بالتنفيذ تجاه المادة الخامسة، علما بأنه نحن في طور الإعداد لتجهيز طلب من أجل الحصول على فترة إضافية سوف يقدم في العام القادم، ونثمن الدعم المقدم والجهود المبذولة من قبل وحدة دعم التنفيذ الICU للاتفاقية، ونشكر جميع جهودهم المبذولة. ختاما سيد الرئيس، إن هذه المبادرة مرحب بها، ولكن نود وننوه على ضرورة استدامتها لفترات ملائمة ومناسبة يمكن من خلالها خلق بيئة مواتية من أجل تحقيق جميع الأهداف الإنسانية للمناطق والمجتمعات المتضررة تلبي تطلعاتهم واحتياجاتهم. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you very much. Yemen. I then turn to Zambia. Please, Zambia, Madam President, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor to contribute to this discourse on the VTF. I didn't want to speak, but I thought I could just raise a few points. I'm also happy that the paper, the document you've produced has given so much, it has generated a lot of interest. And I was happy to see as many countries as possible contributing to this discussion, because it is not an easy one. And so, but I want to say that I am thankful and grateful and commend you and your team for the work you've put into this first document, which is serving as a basis for discussion right now, without which we would have not been having so many speakers if it wasn't well done. So well done to you and your team for this first preliminary document on the possibility of establishing a VTF. Your document has made a good attempt, I must say, at answering some of the basic pertinent questions that those that have doubts about the VTF would want to know from the start. It has answered most of the questions that people would want to know from the start, indeed. So as your committee continues with this discussion, I wanted to just raise 3 points that you may want to consider as you go forward. The first one is that in the event that we agree on the establishment of this VTF, there will be need to look at the issue of the management of the fund. Remember that mine action is very expensive. It's more than any other VTF that we can talk about. There'll be a lot of money involved if we have to agree on having it. So the management of it has to be properly established in this document. Then the second point is who would be the target or possible donors to this trust fund, apart from the traditional donors, that is. I think that also has to be clear in the document. And what would be the time frame for this fund? The other point is the running of the fund has to be transparent, I think, as others have already said, and it has to give sufficient confidence to those that may be reluctant to join into the fund, especially those countries that already have bilateral arrangements with some of these 33 countries that are still having Article 5 obligations. I will stop there. I think these are the few points I thought I could add for you to think about as you continue with your team. But thank you so much. I think you've given us something to think about and to look at, and it's easy now to begin to think about what more should be in the document as we go forward. Thank you, Ambassador, for all your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zambia. And everyone who's thanking me is in reality thanking my good colleague Christian. You all know that. Okay. That brings us to the end of the list of speakers for state parties, if I see no other flags. And I would like really to suggest that we encourage the remaining speakers, Mine Action Review, UNMAS, NPA, ICBL, and MAG, to stick to a 3-minute timeline, if that is at all possible, because by then we can almost finish by 6 o'clock. I turn now to Mine Action Review. Please, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We thank Norway and the members of the working group for their work in exploring the feasibility of establishing a voluntary trust fund and for the paper published. The paper sets out clearly the rationale for and the need for such a fund, especially in the current funding climate and given competing donor priorities. Through our annual research and dialogue with national mine action authorities, Mine Action Review witnesses firsthand that many affected state parties are struggling to secure international support essential for implementation of Article 5. For some affected states, this results in them being left behind, despite relatively modest remaining contamination challenges. In some cases, it contributes to repeated Article 5 extension requests with little or no progress between requests, not because of a lack of commitment, but because the necessary support is not available. We often discuss which elements are important for an effective national mine action programme, but without predictable and sufficient funding, even the strongest national ownership, plans, standards and land release methodology cannot translate into progress on the ground. It is therefore right and important for the working group to move forward at pace towards a concrete proposal or terms of reference. We encourage the group to continue elaborating modalities and criteria with a view to enabling state parties to take an informed decision at 23 MSP. The questions posed to state parties in the paper and from this panel are important and timely ones. While the ownership and decisions about the Voluntary Trust Fund rightly lie with state parties, Mine Action Review believes that clearance operators and civil society can provide valuable practical insight on the target group, eligibility criteria, and types of support that would have the greatest catalytic impact on Article 5 implementation. We therefore plan, in collaboration with ICBL, to convene an informal workshop of clearance operators to discuss the questions posed in this paper. The aim will be to identify, from an operational perspective, where targeted support could have the greatest effect on accelerating progress towards completion and how the fund can best reach those state parties most in need. We would be pleased to share the outcomes of these discussions with Norway and the working group as they take this forward. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I now invite UNMAS. Please, UNMAS, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologies in advance to the interpreters. I've tried to cut down the statement. So, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we're grateful for the leadership of Norway and efforts of all members of the working group. Full implementation of Article 5 obligations is a shared objective for states parties and the United Nations. And meeting these obligations and others under the Convention is truly a multifaceted affair that encompasses technical capability, political engagement, funding, and international cooperation. We acknowledge the struggle noted in the report over prioritizing scarce funding resources while humanitarian needs are mounting, and donor funding remaining highly concentrated and largely earmarked. Advocating for specific and dedicated funding could be a viable way to prioritize meeting obligations under the Convention. Furthermore, providing more unearmarked funding would also allow the necessary flexibility to allow allocation of resources to priorities identified under the Convention's framework. Should states parties decide to establish a VTF, UNMAS has experience in managing a mine action-focused trust fund, the UN Voluntary Trust Fund on Assistance in Mine Action. And we stand ready to provide information, best practices, lessons learned from our own experiences in order to support the President, the working group, and states parties as you continue your deliberations, including, if appropriate, in the upcoming consultation scheduled for August. As distinguished delegates may be aware, one possible option could be considered to establish a dedicated window within the UN Voluntary Trust Fund for Assistance in Mine Action, through which to receive and manage targeted funding assistance to meet the aims of the Convention. Such an approach would minimize startup transaction costs, offer a clearly identifiable channel for targeted support within an established mechanism that already operates under and is compliant with UN financial rules and regulations, that has oversight, experience, and capacity, and a global reach. Should there be an interest in exploring the viability of such an option, indeed in the context of other options, UNMAS remains available to offer its technical experience in order to assist in any future deliberations. Finally, we look forward to supporting efforts to ensure that no one and no state party is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleague, and including for offering to open a door for us, or a window. That is something that we will actively consider. I now turn to NPA. Please, NPA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We thank the Chair Norway and the working group members for the report and the continued work on this important initiative. NPA strongly supports a voluntary trust fund for Article 5 implementation, and we align with the statement just delivered by Mine Action Review. Creation of such a conventional fund is one of the necessary means to support affected states that are struggling to secure international support essential to implement their obligations in a timely and effective manner in line with the humanitarian spirit and objectives of the Convention. We therefore support the working group in their ongoing work on the feasibility study and encourage states parties to move forward with the establishment of a voluntary trust fund under the Convention. NPA welcomes the proposal by Mine Action Review to convene an informal workshop of clearance operators, and we stand ready to contribute as needed as this important work progresses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now turn to ICBL CMC. ICBL, please.
Thank you. The ICBL and the Landmine Monitor would like to thank Norway and the working group for their leadership and hard work on the VTF to date. We have been strongly in favor of this idea since it was first proposed, and we're very pleased to hear the wide-ranging expressions of support in the room today. We agree with the findings of the working group, and we would like to highlight the following 4 points. First, the funding gap around Article 5 implementation is not just about volume, but how available resources are prioritized and allocated. Landmine Monitor data has consistently shown that funding is concentrated among a limited number of states parties, especially given the growing number of humanitarian emergencies creating competing mine clearance needs. Without the establishment of VTF, it is likely that funding gaps for these states will carry on indefinitely, delaying even further the capacity of several states parties to complete Article 5. 2, relatively small but carefully targeted support could have a significant impact on implementation outcomes, particularly for states parties that have medium to small levels of remaining contamination. Third, a VTF could add value by filling a gap in the existing mine action financing landscape, as there is currently no funding mechanism for mine action that is specifically targeted to Article 5 implementation or meeting the needs of states parties to the Convention who are continuously struggling to attract international assistance. And finally, fourth, a state-led VTF designed to serve states parties and established within the framework of the Mine Ban Treaty could significantly enhance the integrity and credibility of the Convention, supporting not just more expedient Article 5 completion, but also directly supporting implementation of Article 6 by a wider range of states. It would also be a very positive signal to states inside and out of the Convention that this treaty remains a highly relevant convention that continues to innovate and improve its mechanisms over time in order to achieve its humanitarian goals. We agree that the working paper offers a good basis for further discussion and refinement, but also raises a number of questions on top of the many additional questions raised here today. With this in mind, and as noted by Lucy with Mine Action Review, we do plan to hold a joint workshop with MAR and operators to discuss the questions raised in more detail and hope that our recommendations to the working group could be helpful. In closing, we urge all states parties to consider the working group's case for establishing a VTF and to support the process towards its realization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ICBL. I now turn to Mag as the last speaker. Mag, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We thank Norway and members of the working group for the work you have undertaken so far. MAC aligns with Mine Actions Review's statement and welcomes the opportunity to participate in the proposed informal workshop that will be held in collaboration with the ICBL, CMC, and operators. We reiterate our support for the creation of a voluntary trust fund and believe that such an initiative should complement rather than replace existing bilateral, multilateral, and direct funding channels, as the Chair noted. If established, a voluntary trust fund could indeed play a useful role in supporting underfunded states parties to, for example, define remaining contamination, prioritize and structure remaining needs and work plans, and ensure that targeted investment delivers the greatest possible impact. We stand ready to support further discussions on this important matter. We thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to say collectively to the operators and to civil society that it's not always good to be at the end of a rushed speakers list like that, but we've taken due note of all your input, and you play a very important role, obviously, in the design of this whole convention and indeed also of the VTF. So thank you for your input, everyone. And that, I think, brings us almost to the end. I would say, as a chair, that I think it was a good idea for us to check in with all of you at this stage of our work. I have sensed that, there is quite some support to the direction of travel, but again, there are details that we need to flesh out for everyone to understand how we should move forward. And we will, of course, provide those details in due course. We will move forward. We take on to move forward with a certain pace, but also take the time necessary to make sure that we can all agree. And we have taken due note, like I said, of everything, a quite rich discussion that came from you. I thank everyone for being concrete and for offering good advice. The next thing that will happen is that you will receive a written call for your input and submissions. I think due to the holidays coming up, this will come out pretty soon before the summer break. So that will be an opportunity for you then to provide in writing your views, and then we will continue with informal discussions early on August, September. So with that, if there's no other requests for the floor, I think we can thank the interpreters for bearing with us another few minutes, but we managed to get there almost in time. Thank you all for working with me on the time management and for your valuable input. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.